because you have two dominant schools of thought right now. You have the traditional John Wooden repetition, repetition, repetition. It's hard to argue against that because there's anecdotally a lot of success to back that up. But then you look at the ecological dynamics approach, and there's also a lot of evidence backing that. And one of the biggest questions I had, because with coaching, a lot of players who get into coaching, they coach how they were coached. And if they were successful players, then they're like, oh, it worked for me. It should work for everyone. And so I come in with sort of fresh mind, and I like doing having them compete and do small sided games and a lot of that stuff. And Nick is more repetition based because that's what he loved as a player. And I'm like, I mean, from 2010 to 2020, he has a pretty good case for the best defender through that decade. It worked for him, and it works for the examples that I used in our text was John Hyden. I mean, that dude ran the same practice every day for like 20 years, and it was just reps, reps, reps. Never played against another team, really. Try loves that. Kristen and Taryn, they never compete against anyone, really. Even when they come out and do a training camp in California, it's just reps, and they had Sarah Wood and Alexa Fernandez training against them, and just so they could do their own practice. And I'm like, I can't say it doesn't work, but I also think this works over here. So how do we weigh this repetition-based programming that clearly has successful examples versus ecological dynamics? Because I feel like the two sides, they butt heads a lot.
Mm. Yeah, it's a big question. The answer is, yeah, again, I don't know. I'll give you some of my thoughts, and
Yeah.
I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts as we go through it. I mean, a couple of things. One, I think, like you said, I don't know if it's necessarily like the repetition view versus the ecological view. I think, like you said, it's just coaches, people have been coaching like their coach coached. And so it's just all over the place. Like it's all over the map. People have done it lots of ways. People have done it with coaches giving long speeches and talking out stuff and watching video and not getting as many reps. Some people have done it with lots of game-like reps serving over a net. Some people have done it maybe more the Brazilian style, where they're multiple touches at the same time. So, and if you're coming from an ecological worldview, you can't say there's one way to do it, right?
Right.
Within the theory is that there are many ways to take on challenges to solve problems. So I guess that's my first thought that yeah, that there's just stuff all over the map, and that humans are incredible learners. Like that's something that we do. We're drawn to. We When we have a task, like we're going to try to figure it out, and we're pretty good at that. So, I mean, to go to some of the specifics, like I was trying to think of that Haydn example. We all have experience in Haydn practices, and I was thinking one thing is that we're comparing Haydn to his contemporaries, and how are they practicing? And I was thinking that I don't know if this example works very well, but let's say I don't know, we go way back. Let's look at one of the all-time great athletes, Babe Ruth.
Yep.
Okay, Babe Ruth was the best, right? But did he ever touch a weight? Like, did he do cleans? Like,
Right.
did he do power squats? And like, okay, well, Babe Ruth didn't do this stuff, so like that's not as good. No, but he was playing against contemporaries that were smoking cigars and that were, they were just, it was a different world. But if we put Babe Ruth like into the major leagues right now, I don't think he'd be very good because he didn't have the same sort of experiences and the same sort of technology, just it wasn't, yeah. So that's one thought is that, Haydn's setting up practices against people that probably are doing inferior practice plans.
Right.
I mean, a lot of just to describe the specifics, when I was at a Haydn practice, it was super focused. Like he knew what he was going to get better at. He wasn't going to waste time. He was going to be really mindful and locked in on every rep. There was no wasted reps. And I did and you guys too have done lots of other practices with beach volleyball players in Europe and Brazil and in the US. And there was a lot of wasted time. And there was just, hey, what do you want to do today? I don't know, like hitting lines, like, so we're not comparing John Haydn to the ecological approach. We're comparing John Haydn to maybe some inferior methods of training is would be my first thought. But I don't know, what do you guys think?
I I trained a lot with Hayden and Scott, and it was definitely a younger Hayden, and we definitely played a lot in practice. He'd still have maybe the like, hey, I want to get a groove and hit 5 line shots, 5 cut shots, blah, blah, blah. But it was always off of a serve pass that hit, no defense maybe. But then we played a lot of wash drills. I think later Hayden, which maybe you practice more or with Try, was a little bit more like, I just need to preserve my body and get like be in the weight room a lot. So I think, I mean, he played a lot of volleyball.
Yeah.
And one thing to think about with him, I think, is that like his game is so different from how other people played. So I think he's almost an example of being adaptable and like all the things that I would maybe tell a player, like stay behind the ball, don't rush in, all this stuff. He would just do something the opposite. And
His out of system, like him and Sean Scott would run that super fast ball on an out of system. He would just
Yeah.
run to the net and jump straight up. He was one of the first to do the way they were doing the on two. Him and Sean would run it really like wide, which are all not conventional thinking. Like, you're supposed to move this way and use your footwork this specific way. So there's parts of it that were, I think that the traditional approach would have, or the maybe more like fundamental based approach where it's like there's a proper way to do things. He didn't necessarily follow that way either.
And I do like the way that, I mean, you guys brought a good point that he sort of built his system and then he played with guys who fit that system. So he played with Sean Scott, who was crazy athletic and could run that really wide push set and option a ton. And then he played with Try, who, for all intents and purposes, was Sean Scott the second, and was just from Hawaii, same height, jumped pretty similar, and could do a lot of the same things. And so he just sort of built his own little unconventional system and just fit guys into that mold,
Hmm.
which smart by John.
Yeah. Yeah. And he was creative in that way. And even like the way he played defense, he was not following this is the proper way to do things. He was going, okay, here's my strengths. I'm not maybe the quickest laterally. So I'm going to play a different style of defense. Like I'm going to figure out my constraints, my specific, and how do I apply that and create a system that's going to help me score points. Where I think sometimes in a more fundamental based view, trying to get away from that tradition, like the traditional approach. I don't know if that's the best word, but for lack of a better word, the traditional approach, I would go, okay, what is Stein doing? So I have to Stein-Metzger. So I've got to, do the same footwork, do it the same way. And that's, I think, a lot of times how we think about learning, just following the person behind you and using the same movements they did. That he was someone who was open to like a more creative, based on his strengths.